infinity is kind of this strange concept. In mathematics, oftentimes we talk a lot about infinity. Why do mathematicians like to consider infinity? And we might ask this question, even though that mathematicians like to consider infinity, why might computer scientists like to think about infinity? Why does this have a place in a computer science course? Do infinite things exist? How many think that they do exist, that there are infinite sets that exist in the natural world? How many think that infinite sets are totally a human invention and are totally not real and can't ever be real? So I think that there were more for these aren't real, it's a fantasy, than for this is actually real. Why do computer scientists consider infinity? So one thing that I will say, whether or not you think that infinite things actually exist, infinite sets actually exist in the universe, infinite sets aren't actually going to exist in terms of like computing. You're never going to be able to have a computer that is going to have, for instance, an infinite amount of memory. You're never going to be able to have some sort of program where you can wait an infinite amount of time for your program to finish. So in computing, all of the things you're going to interact with are always going to be finite. But we still, when we're going to be talking about a theory of computing, it's helpful to talk about infinities nonetheless. So as an example here, this is an IBM 1301 disk storage unit from 1961. So in 1961, your company could rent this machine. This is basically a hard drive. This is probably like the size of a cabinet or something like that. And you could rent this thing for the low price of $2,100 per month, which if you adjust for inflation is $18,000 in today's money. So for $18,000 per month, you could have a whopping 28 megabytes of capacity in your cabinet. So this disk storage unit has a very, very finite amount of memory. By comparison, for many of you, the amount of storage that's on your current laptop computer is effectively infinite. So the idea for why computer scientists consider infinity is kind of like the following. So consider that we have Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, and they've gone out to lunch. Do Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk consider the price of their lunch when deciding what to order? Probably not. As far as lunch is concerned, they have effectively infinite money, right? So Jeff Bezos, with his like $120 billion or whatever it is that he has right now, there's no way he's going to order something at this restaurant that's going to bankrupt him, or that's going to be prohibitively expensive, or is not going to fit in his budget. His budget for lunch is effectively infinite. My budget for lunch is not so much effectively infinite. Money is a much more limited resource for me than it is for Jeff Bezos. So when I'm deciding where I want to go for lunch, what I'm going to order when I get there, I'm going to look at the price. I'm not just going to consider, like, what am I going to enjoy the most, because, like, the cost of something could limit the enjoyment I might get out of it. So for some tasks, considering your budget or how many resources are going to be available to you is not really going to be necessary, because you might have resources that are just so enormous they're effectively infinite. So for certain tasks that you're doing, like the amount of memory that your computer is going to have, it might as well be infinite. There's not going to be any way that you could ever be at risk of exceeding the memory of your machine for certain tasks that you're going to do. For other tasks that you might be doing, that could suddenly start to become important. You might be doing super memory intensive tasks where you have to think about how much storage you have in your computer. If you suddenly decided that you wanted to download Wikipedia, then yeah, maybe you should think about getting an external hard drive. In a similar way, like Elon Musk might actually have to consider what the cost of something is if he wants to try to buy a country. For that sort of task, even with his massive amounts of wealth, he has to be somewhat budget conscious. To give you an illustration of this, does anybody know the value of this? Okay, it is 42. But let's see what Google says. I promise you the answer is 42. When I plug this into Google, it says it's 1.9 times 10 to the 35. It says it's this gigantic number here. If, however, I take this, and here I have Python, so let's just copy and paste this into Python, that's where we get our magic answer of 42. So this is now telling us that the answer to that is indeed 42. Why is it that when I ask Google what the answer is, where we consider Google to be omniscient, it gives us an answer that is enormous, whereas when I ask Python what it is, it says that it's 42. Yeah, so some different data types are going to have more precision. So Google is probably using fixed size integers in whatever their calculator is doing, in their implementation of a calculator. Python, on the other hand, has kind of dynamically sized integers. The larger your number is, or really the farther your number is from 0, the more bits it's going to use to represent that number. However, eventually, Python is just going to run out of space to do that computation as well. Like, at some point, it's just going to say that, oh, the amount of data I need to represent this number is going to be more than the entirety of your hard drive. And at that point, Python 2 is going to start getting the math wrong. So eventually, for any computer you're going to see, once your inputs get big enough, it's not going to work anymore. It's going to break. It's not computing that function properly, because it's finite. So all of the computers you're going to see are finite machines, but we're still going to consider infinity because it's going to be rare that you actually have to consider certain resources for, consider like the actual limit of certain resources for the tasks that you're doing. So why bother with infinity? So even though computers have finite resources, most of the time they are plentiful. So even though Jeff Bezos has a finite amount of money, for most of the things he's ever going to want to do, the amount of money he has is plentiful.